man, alone in a cold universe, born out of darkness and departing into darkness, wants most desperately to leave his visible mark on the world. Here, I was here. A human diary, a chain of knowledge that connects everyone to everyone else. All our faith, passion, and skill, all the horror and beauty of the generations past, are left for us to ponder. We fight, love, build, and destroy, and write that history on stone, on clay, on paper. And then invent the book, a device like the wheel, difficult to improve. Yet we developed bright new technologies, 60 million words on a single disc, the library of the world in your home. But the irony of progress is that it sometimes moves backward. Harvard, founded in 1639, more than a century before the American Republic, with a gift of 150 books, now grown to 7 million. Widener Library, the main research library. Here, Nobel Prize winners roamed the open stacks, historians re-evaluating the past, scientists looking to see what other scientists had already done, statesmen, graduate students, finding here the blocks with which to build in their turn the inverted and precarious pyramid of human knowledge. Yet, month by month and year by year, these precious volumes are burning away with insidious, slow fires. The New York Public Library, where immigrants from every continent climbed the long stairway to read without charge the details of our democracy. In a house of stone meant to last out the centuries, but the stone itself was corrupted by acid rain and polluted air. And inside, millions of books are victims of a chemical disease. John Baker, Chief of Conservation.
We have miles of books in our stacks, and they're all lined up very neatly on the shelf, shelf after shelf, and they really don't look so bad. But when you open them, many, many of them are so brittle and deteriorated that they simply fall apart in your hands. The paper is silently disintegrating, and the intellectual record of the last 150 years is in danger of disappearing.
The Library of Congress, the splendid guardian not only of history and its crucial documents, but of the most ordinary books, newspapers, letters, and diaries, the cumulative daily life of the nation, invaluable and irreplaceable. Yet even here, inside this shell of splendid masonry, millions of volumes are falling apart inside their covers, and within the very fortress meant to preserve them.
A number of years ago, we knew somehow instinctively that we had a problem in preservation, but we didn't know really the extent of it. So we had a survey made of our collections and discovered, much to my horror, that 25% of our book collections of 13 million books, 25% were embrittled. That means they would crumble. More seriously, we discovered that 77,000 volumes a year moved from a highly acidic state into that embrittled state. This is a book taken from our collections, which shows the condition that I've described, the embrittlement. You can see what happens when you do that to it.
7 million books in the Library of Congress are disintegrating now. Many millions in all the libraries of this world, not to mention in the third world. In the third world, it's catastrophic because they don't have even minimal resources to preserve their heritage. So America, Europe, Soviet Union, all of us share this problem. And we're responsible for our brethren's and our sisters' cultures, because scholarship is universal. scholarship cannot be nationalistic. Science is universal. So if some suffer, some disappear, the core of creativity of mankind will disappear.
What is unique about a book is that one can hold it like a hand in one's hands. It secretes a warmth, the proof of a hidden life. One has only to open the pages, and here is a stranger becoming a friend. It speaks, and we hear the voice of an Einstein. I want to know God's thoughts. Or an Emily Dickinson. The opening and the close of being are alike, or differ if they do, as bloom upon a stalk. Or a Whitman, when lilacs last in the doorway bloomed. And the Old Testament, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. But equally, there are books by fools and lunatics, vain and disputatious men, liars and famous criminals. The sun and shadow of the world are reflected in the white and black of these thin, fragile pages. There are wonders recorded in every book, divine and human. But the greatest magic of all is the transmission between the tiny scratch of letters through 12 inches of empty air into the eye, the opening to the mind of man. Such is the book I hold in my hands. What is endangered here, if any book rots from within, is a piece of the history of the human race. Shakespeare, or Dickens, or Darwin, or Thoreau, mind crosses to mind. To a law student, an inventor, a musicologist. To a medical researcher, an engineer, an astronomer. To a political scientist, a mathematician, an economist. Mind crosses to mind. To a novelist whose work is based on the rich materials of human history, James Michener.
It would be very difficult for a group of 3 people to sit down and think up some subject to write about on which there was no information whatever. The men and women of this world have been very bright people sometimes. German scholars, English clergymen, Russian philosophers, French thinkers. They have written about everything. I have never looked at a subject, and boy, I've had a pretty wide scatter of subjects. I have never looked at one, but what some very bright person a long time ago also looked at it, laid out his data, and provided her insights. And there they all are in the books of the world. And I have lived upon the work that other people did before me, oftentimes long before, and oftentimes in languages that I can't read, have to have translated for me. But there is this wonderful body of knowledge in the world, and it is available for any one of us who wants to probe into it.
Where we stand is only the top layer of a series of cultures. Stone by stone, we can excavate down to the time, perhaps 10,000 years ago, when writing was unknown, and the only history was a painted bison in a limestone cave. So the great gems, far beyond any gold cup or hoard of stamped coins, are the words of man. Writing, the perishable record of language. Time, we tend to say, destroys alike the great and the trivial. But that's a lazy analysis. Not time, but flood and fire and war and neglect. Of Sophocles' 123 plays, only 7 survive intact.
Well, nothing here is missing the bottoms, that these little strokes could be the bottom to the next line.
The treasures of 4,000 years of Egypt, reduced to mere fragments, bits of inscribed papyrus, a jigsaw puzzle, with most of it missing. Within a generation or two, our own books in our own libraries will look like this, unless we take heed.
This is truly a book that has died. There is nothing that we can do about it. No book conservator can preserve it. There's nothing that can be done because it's breaking out of the bindings. When you turn a corner, it breaks. In fact, we have to salvage this book some other way.
In universities and research libraries around the world, paper and its permanence have become the subject of intense study and discussion.
Long fibered paper. This is late 17th, early 18th century paper. It's beautiful paper. It has long fibers. It has a nice color. It's strong. And I will pass this around in a few minutes with a piece of brittle paper, and you can see the difference. So, early paper was beautiful.
With the invention of the printing press and the rapid spread of literacy, demand for paper became more and more severe. A never-ending search began for ways to make paper more quickly, more cheaply, and in larger amounts. As years passed, mechanical devices were introduced, and chemicals, such as alum, were added. Alum is acidic. It was the beginning of the real problem. By mid-19th century, when there weren't enough linen and cotton rags, the base for much early permanent paper, paper makers turned increasingly to wood, and more acidic chemicals were used. The acid became a slow-acting time bomb, set to go off in the last decades of the 20th century. Though the problem is now well known, even today, paper makers show too little concern, because only 1% of all the paper they make is used in the production of books. In 1966, Florence, a cruel and universal disaster. The river Arno rose 15 feet above its banks and scored its muddy signature on the white walls and treasures of Florence. Here in the National Library, there were stored, in large stone rooms that could nevertheless not hold back the natural madness of a river, the greatest works of the Renaissance, a world treasure. The manuscripts of Dante and Boccaccio, the sonnets of Petrarch and Michelangelo, and the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci. What happened in Florence shocked scholars around the world. Money and experts were flown to the sodden halls, so marked with river soil, and there began, little by little, the long effort to scrape away the stains. Two decades later, the job is still not finished. Patiently, page by page, we are being given back the treasure of the past and learning for the future how to preserve it. Florence was a warning bell, a prod, and a catalyst for the growing movement toward not merely collection, but preservation of the gifts of history. The Northeast Document Conservation Center in Andover, Massachusetts, one of several centers whose job, supported by money and talent from universities and foundations, is to develop techniques and train personnel to keep books and printed paper alive. Posters, documents, journals, maps, photographs, manuscripts, precious artifacts are lovingly restored by patient and dedicated workers. The center also focuses on preventive preservation.
I conduct on-site surveys of institutions, museums, libraries, historical organizations, town clerks' offices, and I examine the building from the point of view of how well the collections are protected. Another of my responsibilities is to provide assistance in case of disaster, fires and floods that affect library and archival collections. In the case of a major disaster, we are prepared to send somebody to the site and to assist on site. For the great masses of collections, prevention is the key to their preservation.
But it is the slow fires, the acid embedded in the paper, that remain the greatest threat. Page by page, at considerable cost, a book may be deacidified by hand. Some books and other library materials are beyond any such process.
If you wait too long filming a newspaper collection for a library, you may get to your shelves and find that the acid process has burnt your newspapers and they've deteriorated so bad that the pages cannot be turned. At this point, they're not able to be filmed. As you can tell from the color of the newspaper, they're turning brown and they're highly acidic. They're burning up.
To be saved, these printed materials must be transposed to another medium, of which the most common is microfilm.
Microfilming is important because it offers a relatively cheap way of preserving the informational content of the books. These books are not artifactually valuable in and of themselves, so that they do not warrant investing the $300 or $400 or $500 that it would take to preserve them as artifacts. What we want is the information that they contain. The only proven technology that we currently have available to us is microfilming. It's an old technology. It's been around in use since the mid-30s. And if it is properly done, and if the master negatives are properly stored, we know that those images will survive for hundreds of years.
Oh, microfilm I don't like to use, really. When I have used it, I mean, sometimes it's invaluable. For instance, for Stilwell, I found at the New York Public Library, by sheer chance, that there had been a regimental journals buff who'd collected regimental journals, including one that was published in Peking when Stilwell was an officer there in the 15th Infantry. And I remember going through it and getting very bored and just feeling conscientious that I must go on and go finish the rolls, go through them all. Well, toward the end, I did find that there was a roll full of articles in this journal by Major Stilwell himself, which I didn't know he'd written. And if it hadn't existed there on microfilm, I never would have read it, never would have found it. And it gave me a tremendous insight into him as well as into the conditions. But I don't really like using microfilm because in the first place, it's on these machines, and at least in those days, they wiggle and they wobble, and it's an awful nuisance trying to get the text of the column in the right place to use it. And it's not like a book anyway. I mean, a book is something you can handle, you put your hands on, take home with you if you get permission. And it doesn't ever seem as real. I don't really like microfilm except for the fact that it's often indispensable.
Nobody likes microfilm. I'm a historian by professional training. I hate microfilm. I've ruined my eyes using it. But we don't have any choices at the moment. There are very promising new technologies on the horizon, but they are only on the horizon. At the moment, microfilm is the tested, reliable technology that we have at our disposal.
If we have the courage to measure honestly this chemical disease, this secret smoldering fire, The great damage is not to the rare books, which are carefully protected, nor even to the works of prominent authors, for whom, when one book dies, a copy can and will be freshly printed. No, the most terrible destruction will be to the great mass of ordinary materials, among them the records and statistics the Library of Congress relies on in filling the more than 400,000 requests for information received yearly from Congress.
AFDC limit plus my employment put us over the limit, so we did not receive any AFDC then.
The daily minutes of our lives, recorded in ordinary novels, ordinary texts, ordinary letters and diaries, even the poor, bad, or trivial ones. The great task of libraries worldwide is the preservation of the ordinary. Of the making of books there is no end. So said Ecclesiastes. Ours is a paper culture, a civilization built on paper, bearing symbolic marks. We are, in fact, threatened by a paper flood. Every working day into the complex of the Library of Congress flow 6,000 new items. Incredible as it seems, when all these new materials, new books are tested, 90% of them prove to be printed on papers that are acidic.
What do you think of Emmett's idea of making the carts 6 high instead of 4? Do you think that's going to have any impact on the number of books we can put in the chamber?
To deal with the chemical problem, some hopeful new chemical solutions. The Library of Congress, along with a few other libraries of the world, is developing a mass deacidification process to neutralize the acid in books on a large scale by putting thousands at a time into closed chambers and saturating them with a neutralizing vapor at a minimal cost per book. Yet even at a rate of 1 million books a year, to preserve the collection of the Library of Congress alone will take over 20 years. Westbrook, Maine, the S.D. Warren paper mill. There's considerable movement now to use alkaline paper in the printing of books, paper which will last hundreds, perhaps thousands of years longer. This mill is producing such paper and doing it at a profit. And the alkaline paper produced here costs the publishers no more than acid paper. But not enough publishers require it, so the volume of demand is a problem, as is the initial investment for paper mills to convert to a different technology. Still, there's an indirect but increasingly important advantage to alkaline papers. The manufacturing process is far less damaging to the environment, far less polluting to the streams and rivers that all paper mills require. Not all publishers are deaf to these important issues. All university presses now use acid-free paper, and the volume of university publication, once small, is growing rapidly. These presses have the good conscience to print books that can be read by our children and grandchildren and generations beyond. A common symbol for a national standard of paper permanence has been adopted, the mathematical sign for infinity. Our treasures are not only on paper, but since 1900 on crumbling spools of movie film. George Bernard Shaw in an early sound newsreel.
You know, I'm very glad you've come, because I like people to see me. I don't know how it is, but people who only know me from reading my books or sometimes even from seeing my plays, get a most unpleasant impression of.
In 1928, Shaw thought he was speaking for the ages. Not so. The newsreels and movies of the first half of the 20th century were made on nitrate stock, which turns into dust as surely as acid paper. Great efforts are now being made to duplicate and preserve our unique heritage of film.
Chanté par Monsieur Francisco pour la compagnie des phonographes Le Columbia.
From the earliest recording devices, all of recorded sound is also in danger. Records and tapes eventually crack, warp, peel, wear down, or remagnetize into mere noise. Still photographs are also vulnerable, though they can be read by laser and re-recorded on video disc. That way they can be reviewed without damage to originals. A good example of technology coming to the rescue of an earlier technology. But we must be wary of the dangers of inter-destruction even in the new. More and more, the raw data of our civilization are contained on magnetic materials, materials subject to their own slow and secret fires, their own forms of deterioration, and to technological obsolescence. Often it's harder and more perplexing to preserve the most advanced technologies. Technology has penetrated the very heart of modern libraries. More and more, the catalogs of national treasures are being electronically bound together, city to city, continent to continent, to form vast integrated magnetic memories. In an increasing atmosphere of commercialization, some difficult, profound, and disturbing questions. Who will buy? Who will sell? And who will control this new universal network of information?
There's a lot of concern about the fact that we'll have information haves and have-nots, because the electronic format permits a control over the ownership of that information that was not possible before. And as you know, we have a for-profit enterprise that is moving into the whole scholarly environment based on a fee per use. In other words, that you have to pay before you can use the information, and that you don't buy it, you only buy the use, which is very different from the subsidized browsing concept that we have had in the book era. And I think it has tremendous implications for public policy in this country.
Other thoughtful people have pondered these issues.
It's quite odd, you know, that when people talk about technology, they usually don't include the book. And yet the book is probably the most important technological innovation that man has ever made. The one that has transformed his thinking and every other aspect of his life. So that when we think of technology, we mustn't think only of the latest technology. It's also notable that technologies don't always displace their predecessors. In fact, there are very few examples of technologies that have outdated or made totally obsolete their predecessors. We know in our own experience that when people came upon the radio, many people thought it would make the telephone obsolete. Why should you pay to send a message by a wire when you could send it over the air free? And then with television, it was suggested that, of course, people wouldn't listen to radio anymore. But I think the statistics show that there are more radios now than there have ever been, and the rate of increase of radio. People walk with radios in their ears, which nobody had ever thought would happen. But they still carry books in their pockets, and they're likely to continue to do so even after it's possible for us to drive our automobiles while we're watching television.
Stone, clay, canvas, paper, tape, and disc. A human diary. A chain of knowledge that connects everyone to everyone else. All our faith, passion, and skill, all the horror and beauty of the generations past are left for us to ponder.
If
individuals have any sense of the importance of the continuity of the human experience, they can't avoid the problem of preservation of the human record. To fail to do so is, in a sense, to turn your back on history. And it's a kind of an egotistical action of the highest order to think that what's gone before is unimportant. What we're doing here is trying to find a way to save what's important from the past. What we've got to do is make an honest effort to make certain that at least a portion of the past is preserved, not only for our own use, but for the future. Those who will follow us will, I think, rightfully say that we have, in a sense, failed them if we don't make that honest effort.
Only recently has society begun to understand fully the importance of preserving the accounts of what women and men have done and thought and learned. The written record is a fragile one, and not even its most important parts, much less the ordinary, will be saved by accident. Preserving the record of the past is a demanding and costly undertaking, but a beginning has been made. The Library of Congress and a few other leading research libraries are at work. The National Endowment for the Humanities has created a special Office of Preservation and has funded some pioneering efforts. And a newly formed Commission on Preservation and Access is now seeking to reinforce personal and institutional initiatives. The slow fires can be contained, but only if the will to do so is a match for the magnitude of the task.